The ocean was still black when Captain Nolan spotted the shape. It had been a long, uneventful night. Just him, a skeleton crew, and the hum of the supply vessel carving through the swells. They were far from shore. Too far. 135 miles out, and the horizon still hadn't caught fire with the morning. Only the sky knew the time, and even it was hesitant to say. Then a shout. "Cap! Something portside! Moving!" Nolan climbed from his chair with a grunt, coffee still steaming in his mug. He peered through the fogged window, squinting as the light barely started to filter through gray-blue haze. Probably driftwood, he thought, or trash, or maybe even a seal. But as soon as he raised the binoculars, he froze. It wasn't driftwood. It was alive. Golden, soaked, paddling with mechanical rhythm through rolling sea. A dog, no, a golden retriever, swimming alone in open water. His ears were flat against his skull, and his nose barely skimmed the surface. But his eyes? They were locked onto the boat. Not wild, not desperate. Focused. "Cut the throttle!" Nolan barked. "Get a rope! Fast!" They scrambled. Deckhands dropped their tools. Someone stumbled, grabbing a sling net. Another threw a flotation ring that the dog ignored completely. But he kept swimming. Head high. Muscles failing. Paws slapping water harder now, slower. He was losing strength. By the time they reached him, the dog didn't fight. He let the harness cradle his body and lifted limp into the air like a soldier being pulled from a battlefield. When his paws touched the deck, he collapsed immediately, chest heaving, muzzle trembling. Not a single bark. "Jesus," one crewman muttered, crouching down. "He's skin and bone." Nolan knelt beside the retriever and ran a hand gently across his soaked coat. Underneath the fur, he felt every rib, every bump of vertebrae. The dog's nose twitched, but his eyes stayed on Nolan. "You're not just lucky," Nolan whispered. "You're looking for something, aren't you?" They wrapped him in blankets, warmed IV fluids with a space heater, and still the dog didn't sleep. He just laid there, blinking slow but alert, like he was waiting for the next step. The Coast Guard laughed when Nolan first called it in. "You said what?" "A golden retriever, sir, swimming, 135 miles offshore. You sure it's not a seal?" But when they arrived, their expressions turned from amused to confused to alarmed. They scanned his body, checked his paws, bleeding. Pads shredded, salt-dried fur peeling in patches. No ID tag, no microchip, no life jacket. No reason. But then they found it. Subtle, faint, but undeniable. A line pressed into the fur around his neck. A collar. Recent. Tight. Too tight. But there was no collar on him now. One of the younger officers stared for a long time and murmured, "Someone took it off." Back on shore, word spread fast. By the time Nolan docked that night, local news vans were already waiting. They swarmed the dock. Microphones, questions, shutter clicks. The crew answered what they could, but the story told itself. Miracle Dog found 135 miles at sea. Rescue at dawn. Golden Retriever's survival baffles experts. The lone swimmer who refused to drown. The animal shelter took him in. Volunteers named him Marlin. Donors flooded the center with food, blankets, toys. Hundreds of adoption requests rolled in from across the country. Someone started an Instagram page. Within hours, it had 90,000 followers. But Nolan couldn't shake the look in the dog's eyes. It wasn't the look of an animal escaping danger. It was the look of one heading somewhere, like he'd been on a mission. "I don't think he was trying to survive," Nolan said in a follow-up interview. "I think he was trying to finish something." A reporter tilted her head. "Finish what?" Nolan didn't answer. He wasn't sure anyone would believe it anyway, but deep down, he knew the dog hadn't been lost. He'd been trying to be found. The shelter vet called it a miracle. "No way he should have survived that," she said, shaking her head as she inspected the retriever's raw paws. "His muscles are in shock, he's dangerously dehydrated, and—" She gently turned his head. "That mark on his neck? It's deep. Whatever was around it, it was tight." She paused. "Too tight for too long." He didn't flinch. He let her examine him with the same strange stillness he'd shown since boarding the boat. His eyes weren't afraid, they were observant, as if he were cataloging the humans around him, measuring what to trust, what to ignore. A staff member entered holding a box of collars. "We'll need to name him for the intake form." "He already has one," another said. "Marlin." The vet laughed. "Fitting, a sea dog." But something about the name felt temporary, as though the dog was allowing them to use it, like a mask he'd wear until he could finish what he came to do. They took photos, posted his story online. Within 24 hours, his face was everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, national headlines. "Golden Retriever found 135 miles from shore." People speculated wildly. Some called him a hero. Others thought it was a prank, a publicity stunt, a bizarre form of abandonment. But beneath the noise, one message came through again and again. Someone's looking for him. Shelters across the coast checked their records. Lost dog reports were pulled from up to 4 states away. Nothing matched. No case described this retriever. No one reported a golden lost at sea. Still, messages poured in. An older woman from Oregon swore the dog resembled one her son had before deploying to Afghanistan. A man from Miami said it looked like a dog he'd seen in a stolen pet ring. A nurse from Alabama even claimed the eyes reminded her of a therapy dog that used to visit children's hospitals, but that one had been reported euthanized 5 years ago. No photos matched, no chips pinged. And yet, "He has somewhere to be," Nolan muttered days later as he visited the shelter. He stood by the enclosure, watching the dog sit near the window, alert but calm. "He hasn't barked once," the shelter director said. "Maybe he doesn't need to," Nolan replied. "He already got our attention." That night, the dog refused to eat. They offered chicken, wet food, even steak, smuggled in by a volunteer who just couldn't stand seeing that face. He sniffed it, turned away, and instead walked to the glass wall separating him from the entrance hallway, and sat, just watched the door, all night. The cameras showed him resting for no more than 20 minutes at a time, always waking to look again, as if waiting for someone, or something. By morning, a note was taped to the shelter's front window, written in blocky, anxious handwriting. "I know that dog." Underneath, a phone number, no name. The woman who answered sounded cautious, nervous. "I saw his photo online," she said. "That's Charlie." "Charlie?" the director repeated. "My husband. He used to call him that." Her voice cracked. "Before everything." The team froze. "Can you tell us what happened?" There was a pause, then a shaky breath. "You're not going to believe me." That afternoon, she arrived in person, late 40s, pale, wore sunglasses and a sweatshirt too heavy for the season. She kept her hands in her pockets the entire time. When they walked her to the enclosure, the dog was already standing, tail still, body tense. She stepped forward slowly. "Charlie?" The retriever took one step, then another. He didn't run. He didn't leap. He walked like someone who knew the stakes of moving too fast. Then, finally, he rested his head against her stomach. She crumbled. "I thought he was gone forever." They let her sit on the floor with him. The dog curled beside her like he'd never left. That was when she began to talk. "3 years ago, we left," she said. "Me and my son. From the house. We had to. It wasn't safe anymore." Her voice was low, cracked by exhaustion and memory. No one interrupted. "I tried to take Charlie, but he wouldn't come. He just kept barking and barking at my son's room, like he wanted to stay. I didn't know why. I couldn't stay long enough to figure it out. We ran." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I came back 2 days later. The house was locked, empty, no sign of him." "Was there a man?" one of the staff asked gently. She nodded. "My husband. He died at sea last month." Silence fell. "How did Charlie get out there?" someone finally asked. She didn't have an answer, but the look in her eyes said she wasn't surprised. The reunion at the shelter didn't feel like closure. It felt like opening a wound no one had dared touch for years. After Charlie curled into the woman's lap and finally slept, the first deep sleep since the rescue. The staff dimmed the lights and gave her space. But Nolan stayed. He sat across the room, arms crossed, eyes fixed on her face as she began to speak again, this time slower, not rushed, not defensive. "We had a son," she said, voice so quiet it nearly got lost in the hum of the ventilation. "Caleb. He was 8 when we left." She looked down at Charlie, her fingers buried in his fur. He and this dog were inseparable. Wherever Caleb went, Charlie followed. It was like they shared a language none of us understood. Nolan leaned forward. "But you said you came back for the dog?" She nodded. 2 days after we left, we stayed in a motel. I had bruises. Caleb had nightmares. I didn't sleep for 36 hours straight, but I couldn't stop thinking about Charlie." Her hands tightened. "So I drove back, late at night. The house was empty, lights off, door locked. I broke in. No dog, no dishes, just silence, like they had vanished." The room felt heavier with every word. She went on. "The police came, opened a missing persons report, but the body wasn't found until weeks later, washed up against a wrecked charter boat. My husband." Nolan's brow furrowed. "And Caleb?" A pause. She closed her eyes. "We never found him." Outside the glass, Charlie stirred. The shelter director whispered, "Could he have stayed behind with the boy?" She nodded again. "Caleb was terrified, didn't speak to strangers, barely spoke to me after what happened. Charlie was the only one who could calm him." A long silence passed before she added, "Part of me thinks he didn't run. He just hid, somewhere no one looked." The story should have ended there. Grief, mystery, the quiet miracle of a dog returning from the sea. But Charlie wasn't done. 2 days after the woman left the shelter with him, Nolan received a call. "Sir, the dog's back." "What do you mean back?" "He showed up at the gate this morning, alone." They reviewed footage. Charlie sat by the front door just before dawn, waiting patiently. No barking, no scratching, as if to say, "We're not finished." The woman returned, shaking. I don't understand. He was fine last night. Slept next to me." Nolan didn't say anything. He just looked down at Charlie, who again was staring at the shelter doors, the same alert focus, the same calm urgency. Then something happened. He stood, walked over to the front desk, sniffed a stack of forgotten flyers, picked one up in his teeth and dropped it in front of Nolan. It was an old bulletin, one of dozens printed in the early days of Caleb's disappearance. A grainy photo, a missing boy in a red shirt. Age, 8. Last seen, Coastal County. Below that, a line in bold. Might be hiding nearby, may not respond to strangers. Charlie sat, unmoving. Everyone in the room froze. The next day, Nolan insisted they follow him. Charlie led them down a series of wooded trails behind the town's industrial district. Places no one had reason to visit. An old storm shelter, a burnt shack, the edge of an abandoned rail station. And then, deeper into the marsh. They nearly turned back. The heat was unbearable, the brush dense. But Charlie kept going, looking back only to make sure they were still with him. Finally, they reached a clearing, and that's where they found the shoes. Children's shoes, mud-caked but preserved from rain under a rusted awning. Next to them, a sock with a cartoon dinosaur. The woman dropped to her knees. "My God." Nolan crouched beside her and lifted the items gently into a bag. "We'll send these to forensics, if there's any DNA. "Stop," she whispered. "They're his." "How can you be sure?" "Because," she said, "I was the one who bought them." Charlie whined once, quietly. Then he lay down. Not because he was tired, because this was the place he had been trying to return to. The forensic test came back within 48 hours. The shoes, the sock, both carried DNA traces. Some degraded by time, others faint but consistent. What they confirmed wasn't conclusive in the eyes of the law, but for the woman kneeling in that field, it was enough. "It's him," she whispered, holding the bag like it held breath itself. No human remains were found, no bones, no burial site, just that makeshift shelter hidden deep in the marsh, as if a child had tried to disappear from the world and nature had helped him do it. A place cobbled together from what was around: wood panels, cardboard, old carpet scraps. Inside, they found something else. A notebook, water-damaged, mostly unreadable, but on one page, pressed between two wrinkled sheets, a drawing: two stick figures, one big, one small, and next to them a golden dog, written above in blocky letters, "Me, Mom, Charlie." That night, the woman sat in Nolan's truck for nearly 2 hours, staring out the windshield, Charlie's head resting quietly on her lap. She didn't cry this time. She didn't ask questions, just sat there, stroking his fur, as if trying to understand how grief and relief could exist in the same breath. "He waited here," she finally said, "all this time." Nolan nodded. "He never gave up." "But why come back now? Why swim out that far? Why the ocean?" Charlie lifted his head, not as if he understood the words, but as if he felt them, as if somewhere inside him was a compass, and it had finally found rest. Nolan leaned forward, elbows on the steering wheel. "Maybe he thought Caleb would come back the same way you left." "What do you mean?" "You ran from land. Maybe Charlie thought, if he couldn't bring Caleb to you, he'd go find you himself, even if it meant crossing the sea." The thought landed heavy in the silence. The press wanted answers. The shelter declined interviews. The woman refused to speak publicly. "This wasn't for the world," she told them. "It was for a boy no one looked hard enough for, except a dog." Still, the story leaked. The image of Charlie sitting in that field beside the rusted awning went viral again. But this time, the headlines didn't say "Miracle Dog." They said, "He waited where no one looked." The dog who remembered when everyone else forgot. The golden retriever who led them home. Charlie changed after that, not visibly, not to outsiders, but those who'd met him before knew. The tension in his body melted. The stillness became peace. He started eating again, sleeping fully, even barking, once sharp and short, when a delivery man knocked on the door. It felt like he had exhaled, like the burden he carried had finally been passed to those strong enough to bear it. Weeks later, the woman returned to the field. She brought tools, wooden stakes, rope, a plaque she had engraved herself. Nolan helped her put it up, a simple wooden arch just tall enough for a child to walk through. On the plaque, she wrote, "For the boy who disappeared, and the dog who didn't." They didn't add flowers, no polished stones, just that. And Charlie sat beside her, watching the wind shift the tall grass. Later that afternoon, while they packed up the tools, Charlie wandered to the edge of the clearing. He stopped, turned around, and barked. 3 short bursts. Nolan squinted into the trees. For a moment he thought he saw something. A flicker of movement in the brush. A shape. Maybe an animal. Maybe nothing. The woman stepped closer. "You saw it too, didn't you?" Nolan didn't answer. They stayed a while longer, watching the trees, listening, hoping for a sound, a sign, a footstep. But none came. Only wind, and Charlie's ears twitching forward, alert but calm, as if he knew someone had been there. The wind had changed. It wasn't just a shift in temperature. It was something subtler. A stillness that settled over the clearing after the plaque was placed, like the land itself had exhaled. Charlie sat facing the trees long after the tools were packed away. Not tense, not nervous, just present, like he was expecting something, or someone. The woman, Caleb's mother, rested a hand on Nolan's shoulder. "I should go," she whispered. "I don't want to believe in things that might not be real." But Charlie didn't move. His body leaned slightly forward, eyes locked on the tree line, tail flat but alive, tapping slowly. Nolan narrowed his eyes and stepped away from the truck. Then he heard it, a sound so faint he wasn't sure if it was wind or voice. Then again, clearer. "Charlie?" The name didn't come from the woman. It came from the woods. She froze. Her fingers gripped the edge of the truck. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Charlie?" The retriever leapt to his feet and bolted. No hesitation, no checking behind him. He tore across the clearing like a bullet, crashing into the trees. The woman dropped everything and ran after him, heart slamming in her chest. And then she saw him, thin, shoeless, standing just beyond the tree line, half concealed in brush and shadow. A boy, no older than 11, pale skin, tired eyes, clothes faded, too small for his growing frame, but his voice was steady. "Mom?" She didn't answer right away, her breath caught between sobs and disbelief. She fell to her knees and reached out, hands trembling. "Caleb!" Charlie reached him first. The dog barreled into the boy's chest with a soft whine, nuzzling his ribs, circling him in tight loops before sitting in front of him protectively. Caleb didn't cry, he simply wrapped his arms around the golden retriever's neck and held on. For a very, very long time. Later, when asked how it was possible, where the boy had been, how he'd survived, the details emerged slowly. A crawlspace under a neighboring property, abandoned trailers, canned food left behind by squatters, kind strangers who never asked questions. Caleb had lived in the in-between, afraid of returning, unsure if anyone was still looking. "I was waiting," he said softly while a paramedic checked his vitals. "I kept thinking maybe Charlie would come." He looked up at his mother. "He found you, didn't he?" She nodded, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Yes, baby. He swam across the ocean for us." The reunion made headlines around the world, but this time the media didn't turn it into a spectacle. People shared the story not for the shock, but for the hope. Photos of Caleb and Charlie went viral, especially one where they're sitting under the wooden archway in the field, sunlight cutting through the tall grass. A caption ran beneath it. "He waited where no one else could, and when no one came, he went and found them." Charlie never left Caleb's side again. He slept in his room, waited outside therapy sessions, followed him to school, drop-off, and pickup. When Caleb spoke, Charlie looked directly at him, as if listening was a full-time job. And maybe it was. Because sometimes the ones who can't speak need someone who never stops hearing. One evening, months later, Nolan returned to the clearing alone. He walked under the arch, now worn by weather but solid as ever. Flowers had been laid nearby. A child's bracelet hung from one of the wooden beams. On the back of the plaque, in fresh ink, someone had written, "Sometimes the rescue comes looking for you." He stood in silence, then turned around and saw Charlie waiting by his truck. Not barking, not rushing, just waiting, like always. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who never gave up on you. Because sometimes loyalty isn't just about staying. It's about finding your way back, no matter how far the current takes you.